Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, May 29th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about the United States Senate election in Michigan and how an under-the-radar race could determine the future of the Congress, future of the United States Senate come January 2025 in a very competitive Senate race that has gone largely unnoticed by the mainstream media, by political pundits, by fundraising efforts all across the board here. We find that Michigan has really faded off in terms of electoral prominence when it comes down to these upcoming Senate races. Now, the reason I'm covering this is because the Associated Press came out with an article roughly 4 weeks ago talking about this race, calling it an under-the-radar Senate race here, but largely because even since the publication of this article, we have yet to see any major conversation surrounding the Senate race. Initially, I wrote this off as something that made some sense, given where we were in the primary season, given that we had ramped up very early on in a general election season, unlike a traditional presidential election year. But it is very odd and interesting that Michigan has largely flown under the radar in the truest sense because of a variety of different things that are at play here. Michigan has a competitive presidential race, numerous competitive congressional races, and also including the Senate race, but I was more focused there on the House races. And I find it to be uniquely interesting that Michigan, of all states, does not have that much polling done in this state. We find that other battleground states, other battleground Senate races even, are getting more polls churned in and out of the state, and it's providing us additional context and a deeper understanding about individual states, but Michigan just really hasn't gotten that. And so where Michigan plays a part in the grand scheme of things on the Senate level, we can talk about from now. I think we really need to start off by prefacing this entire video by talking about how Michigan truly could make or break the Democratic majority. And with that, too, I want to move and transition into a bit of the history about Michigan's Senate races there, what we could expect in 2024, and also maybe just provide a bit more context as to, races in the past, like 2018 and 2020, that also similarly were under the radar and, less covered, less discussed, and that resulted in, varying different things for the mainstream political parties. Again, we'll talk about that when we get there. And then we'll pretty much tap it off or cap it off here, talking about what happens with this, the next coming months, what happens with Mike Rogers, who's potentially going to be most likely the Republican nominee for Senate here, Elisa Slotkin, most likely to be the Democratic nominee for Senate here, what we can expect over the coming months, what we can expect in the general election season, and when we might expect Michigan to come at the forefront of our conversation, at the forefront of our Senate predictions and Senate discussions. And so to give you a baseline of where both political parties are, in terms of all of the states that we expect them to win by a pretty significant margin, we can characterize those now. Because these are the states that you really don't need to give much conversation or much discussion to, because we know how they're going to go, and that's really just the end of it. So states like Texas and Florida are going to become Republican states. States like Virginia, of course, are going to be blue. We generally believe that Wisconsin and Pennsylvania will vote to the left of Michigan when it comes down to the Senate level there. Ohio, we expect to vote to the right. So those states I would definitely group together as toss-ups. Montana, I would group in as a toss-up. Arizona and Nevada would also group in as a toss-up here. And so we really are down to 5 key crucial states that are going to be super important for either political party if they want any chance at winning Senate control. The good news for Republicans is that they need just one of these seats. And so if they get Michigan, they win Senate control. The bad news, too, for Democrats, and, again, further good news for Republicans, if Democrats even want to win the majority, they'll have to win all of these states, including Michigan. And I will say this. If Democrats are not winning Michigan, it is a sign of a deeper problem here. But the sleeper nature of this race means we really don't have Michigan as an early litmus test as to where states like Michigan might be going if given the opportunity to have an open race, to have somebody just baseline, no incumbency advantage here, Democrat versus Republican. It's a very interesting way to look at races because open races often do tell us the traditional partisanship of states. For instance, in a state like West Virginia, which now has an open Senate race, Joe Manchin, the Democrat, previously held this seat. He won it in 2018. West Virginia was a blue state on the Senate level when it came down to Joe Manchin's seat. And, even 10, 20 years ago, West Virginia had been a very solid Democratic state on the congressional level. But as it became more and more Republican, it needed those opportunities to become Republican strongholds, become victories for the GOP, and that relied on a no incumbency advantage seat, like this one where it's an open race, and now the incumbent Republican governor is winning here by 30 to 40 points across the state. And so Michigan, again, this will help us understand more about how, at baseline, these Rust Belt states may be inclined to vote. Take away incumbency. Take away what you know about candidates beyond the campaign season. Nothing about constituent services services. Nothing about their, years of experience serving the same state that they want to continue serving in Washington, D.C. This is a clean slate. For Lisa Slotkin and Mike Rogers, two people who have served or are serving in the House of Representatives, come from a very equal standpoint. And so now Michigan will be tried and tested as to which side of the aisle it's on. And so Michigan provides, unique context there about, where some of these states that are swing states at baseline might be going. But the problem is, because we don't have this much attention on it and this much concern about it, we are finding that it becomes a sleeper state to a point where it really provides very, very little useful information about where the Senate races are, but could truly determine a lot. And so Michigan, I think, part of the reason I like to use this term sleeper state compared to what might be more of a traditional swing state or something that just simply is less discussed than other states, I think Michigan very much consistently has been a sleeper state for the past couple of election cycles. What I mean specifically is when I look back at 2016 on the presidential level, nobody, and I mean nobody, thought Michigan was going to be a Republican state. Pennsylvania was iffy, Wisconsin had been iffy, but Michigan had been a state that Obama had won by the largest margins out of any of the three, and arguably, too, Donald Trump won by the smallest of margins out of any of the three. And so Michigan came into this as a state where Obama won here by over 15 in 2008. You remember the John McCain campaign publicly announced they were giving up on the state of Michigan, abdicating responsibility from this battleground state, said, we're giving it to Obama. I mean, could you imagine if Donald Trump had done that in 2016 and said, it's all yours, Hillary Clinton? There may have been circumstances where had he done that in the states that you might have seen it under a John McCain or Mitt Romney campaign, they would have never won the presidency. And so Michigan came in as a state that nobody expected to go red. Nobody expected it to go red. And it ended up going red by roughly 11,000 votes out of nearly 4.5 million cast. Then came the 2018 Senate race. Democrats were riding high. They did well in the governor's race, won by roughly 10 points. But the Senate race here, Debbie Stabenow, a very adored incumbent, might I add, not somebody who comes in with political scandal or political conversation around whether they're, the best person for the job. I mean, Debbie Stabenow was someone that Democrats wanted and many independents did too, and clearly the voters did, but she only won by roughly 7 points. And so that was sort of an early warning sign that Michigan in 2018 would predict that in 2020, it wouldn't be as democratic as it might have been in 2008 or 2012. It was going to go back to being a competitive state, and a competitive state it was. When you take a look at where it was in the 2020 presidential, Michigan ended up going to Joe Biden by roughly 2.8%. A significant narrowing from the 2018 midterm elections, both on the Senate level, but also the gubernatorial level, and just in the baseline vote when it came down to congressional vote share in the state of Michigan. Michigan had become a very competitive state, despite the polls predicting that Joe Biden was there to win by a very strong margin. And then in 2020 as well, not only did Joe Biden have a surprisingly narrow presidential race, the Senate race was very much a sleeper race here. Gary Peters, the Democrat, was expected to outperform President Biden and win by anywhere between 9 to 10 points across the state. Michigan was not meant to be a competitive Senate race. It was going to be likely blue. We predicted it was going to be likely blue. Very confident that Democrats were going to do well in this battleground Senate race and make it not a battleground Senate race. And yet we were wrong. Gary Peters not only underperformed the polls, but underperformed President Biden and won by just 1.7%. Michigan needed days to call the Senate race here, despite not that much media attention. A fraction of money spent in Michigan compared to what was spent in a state like South Carolina, where over $100 million was spent on both sides of the aisle in this state that was supposedly a battleground. And it ended up being a 10-point margin of victory for Lindsey Graham across this state. South Carolina might have narrowed up compared to the presidential, but Michigan was the true sleeper of this entire race here. Michigan was a race where we did not expect anything in terms of competitiveness and got everything to a point where Michigan could not be called until days after the election, unlike literally every other state on that map there, with the exception of the Georgia runoffs, which we ended up seeing called on election night in January. And so to put all of those things into perspective and to put all of those things into better understanding, Michigan has been a sleeper race in 16, 18, 20, and while not so much in 2022 because of the abortion referendum that was on the ballot there. We saw a lot of conversation with Proposal 3. We saw a lot of, heavy conversation around the governor's race too, because Jorgensen had entered into the race after a whole, assortment of scandals popped up on the GOP side. I mean, what we found here was that in Michigan in 2022, this might have been the only exception to the rule here, but now this competitive Senate race is going to potentially make or break everything. Because I could genuinely see a reality, and you can see this too, based on the numbers that Democrats are spending in. They have over $50 million allocated to Montana, over $50 million allocated to Ohio, tens of millions allocated to Arizona, tens of millions allocated to Nevada. Barely anything allocated to the state of Michigan. You can see it too in open secrets. Elisa Slotkin might have raised $15 million, but when you take a look at some other states, you find that it's a lot more in them. For instance, when you're heading over, Senate race here in Arizona, Ruben Gallego has raised $20 million. His polls look a lot better than they look for Elisa Slotkin against Mike Rogers. You can see in the Senate race here, Ruben Gallego is ahead by 7 points. Let's take a look at some other states. Let's go down to the state of Montana, for instance, just picking out a random state. Well, let's take a look at the amount of money that has been raised on the Democratic side here, if it ends up loading. While we let it load, we're going to head over to the polls here. Right now, Jon Tester leads by 5.5%. Well, on the Senate side, he has raised a whopping, let's see here, come on, load into the Senate race here. I'm really interested to see. You're going to find that he raised more than Elisa Slotkin did. He raised more than many Democrats did, $36 million. And I mean, it doesn't just end here. I don't want to spend too much time waiting for, this page to load here, but what I want you to understand is that Democrats, national and, local to the states, are fundraising more heavily than Elisa Slotkin, spending more money on other states besides Michigan, and it could genuinely be a state that, despite it being a traditionally competitive race, one that Democrats really not necessarily ignore, but put on the back burner because they believe other states might be more competitive. And by focusing on those other states, sure, they might be preventing the competitiveness of the race. But let's say there's a reality like this one where all of these other states are going blue and Michigan goes red. Democrats are going to be really upset with themselves about the way they treated this race. And I think arguably, too, it's going to really question. When some of these races are being called out as sleeper races this early on in the campaign season, we're recognizing there's some very early warning signs here, arguably, too, for both parties. But now for Democrats more so because they're the ones who are holding it and need it a lot more than Republicans do. And so you really have to question, this is the wrong way to do things, so how do you fix it? And so I think what we're going to find is that Michigan is going to move closer to being at the forefront of conversation in Senate discussions, in our predictions. Even my predictive model here that we have from earlier on in this month, you can see that Republicans are expected to do better in Michigan than they are in Pennsylvania, in Wisconsin, in Minnesota, in New Mexico, and on par with how Democrats are going to do in states like Nevada and Arizona, which are arguably much more pro-Republican. You saw it in 22, arguably much more pro-Republican than Michigan is, and yet it's because largely Michigan has seen the right type of GOP nominee and the wrong type of coverage here, because it means there isn't much, topic of conversation around it, which means there's less money going to it, less resources being allocated, and less concern overall from the National Democratic Party. And so therein lies your problem that Michigan Democrats really need to fix. Because if Donald Trump is winning on this ballot here, given what happened in 2020, it's very possible that Elisa Slotkin loses. Elisa Slotkin right now is ahead by 2 points across the state, but with very low name ID. It isn't just that this race is low profile for the rest of the nation, it's low profile in the state of Michigan too. The highest we've seen for either candidate here is 42%, which in best case, 18% of the electorate is undecided. On average, 22% of the electorate is undecided. These things only happen in races where nothing really matters, but in Michigan, in this case, everything matters. Democrats and Republicans should be fighting tooth and nail for every Senate race here. And right now, it feels like Michigan really isn't getting the attention that it deserves or that it necessitates in order for either political party to really do well in this state. Michigan's Senate race is going to be one of the most important come November. It's an open race. There are competitive races in down ballot and up ballot, and also the fact that the Republican here is strong, and so is the Democrat. And so this will be a true test of partisanship, a true test of party allegiance and fealty that we will find from the people of Michigan. Who and which political party, we don't know. But time will tell, and this Senate race will be a very strong indicator that at baseline, where are these Rust Belt states leaning? and who were they leaning towards in this election. Because Michigan is a state that is a must-have for Democrats. Not necessarily for Republicans by any metric, but absolutely necessary for Democrats. And we will see if they end up winning here. Because right now the numbers look strong, but they're misleading. They don't tell the full story, and I would caution it with that being kept in mind. And so Michigan right now, while I do believe would go to the Democratic Party, I'm a lot more apprehensive about it than I think I should be, given this state's, pretty strong Democratic history, but also has a very strong reputation as a sleeper state, and that's exactly what it is as of right now in this election cycle. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and a playlist for 2024 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.